know that the war has caused deep divisions in the country, but I say to you that we are faced with a real problem of global terrorism that will not go away unless we deal with it. And if there's any other way of dealing with it, apart from, well, firstly, I want to say, it was so much more convincing when Donald was saying this. I wish you could meet Donald Rumsfeld. He's a very impressive man. He's a great man. I'm a little man. I should have been a pair of ragged claws. I mean, the other day I was talking too much, and he threw a book at me, and he said if I didn't stop talking, he would shoot me. The great thing was he meant it. But no, the other, firstly, there is too much talk about, frankly, about the provenance of the intelligence material and not the substance. I mean, yeah, all right, maybe one of these dossiers did come from a Californian PhD student's thesis, but I defy anyone to read the actual thesis and what he says, which is based on years of research, and not come to the same conclusions we did. I mean, when he's, Californian PhD student or not, when he's describing Saddam's stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons, he says, based on years of research, and I'm quoting now, that they are bodacious and totally awesome dude. Now, if that's not good enough for people, then, I'm sorry. And the only way that we can deal with the problem of global terrorism is to kill and maim as many Arab, preferably Muslim children as possible in a war which Kofi Annan describes as illegal. Because, if there's any other way, if there's another way of uniting secular Arab nationalism with militant Islam, then, I'd like to hear it. Because I tell you, I don't think you'll find one. You can search and you won't find. That's why I'm saying, I tell you, there is a problem of word fatigue. Classic transference. Psychological transference. You put your own shit on someone else. Blair, putting it on. Word fatigue. From our own lives what word fatigue is, right? It's that feeling when the tongue becomes like a wooden clapper and a cardboard bell as we hear ourselves saying what we no longer believe in. And the more we realise that our words are hollow and that we've never believed this, the more stridently and more often we have to recite the worn-out mantra. The opposite of word fatigue might be the joyful exuberance of at last uttering the truth which has for too long been suppressed. It might, for example, be the Times headline of July the 12th last year. And the Times, by the way, is a brilliant newspaper, because every now and then it forgets that there are certain things you are not supposed to mention, and just gets carried away. And the headline was, West sees glittering prizes ahead in giant Iraqi oil fields. Sorry, was I not supposed to mention that? Sorry, it's just so exciting. You see, there's three giant southern offers. There's Mars, New, Narima, West Coast. I reckon the first are good for 700,000 barrels a day, but okay, mum's a word, shall I say that? 220 billion barrels of chemical weapons, not as good as a winter flying rat. Ha ha. I'm not saying it's the only reason, but, there's, 1946, US State Department describes, Iraq as a stupendous source of strategic power and the greatest material prize in world history. Now, it's not the only thing. There's never a single cause for anything. There's a nexus of weakly acting causal pathways, but, for example, here we are. Seems to me we don't want to be, beginning of the 21st century, and we do not want to be going into the 21st century repeating the mistakes of the 20th century. You think, what was the original mistake of the 20th century from which all else follows? The Treaty of Versailles, Third Reich, nuclear holocaust, First World War. All right, what caused the First World War? And now here I suspect that many of you, like me, have never been entirely satisfied or convinced with the standard explanation we were given for this at secondary school. The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. No one is that popular. I fucking love that geezer. DJ's at my sister's wedding. A slightly more efficient cause might be the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, commenced construction in 1911. Admiral Jackie Fisher's just changed the British Navy from coal to oil. German Navy follow suit. They don't have oil-producing colonies. They begin their Drang nach Osten, the drive to the east. There's already a rail link from Berlin to Constantinople to Italy. That last 900 miles that will bring them out in Baghdad. The rest of the European powers are not like this. Russia, the Netherlands, the Royal Dutch Shell, France, Britain. For two reasons. Britain, in particular, we know that we cannot compete with the Germans in engineering terms because people will not accept the Sarajevo to Basra replacement bus service. Number two, all the major powers know that once that rail link is built, there's nothing to stop a Munich businessman getting out of the Baghdad terminus with a Deutsche Bank checkbook, smashing the cartel. There begins a phony war. Churchill, who's Minister for War and Air at the time, said Sidney Riley down to the Gulf. Sidney Riley, who's described in one book I'm reading about at the minute as probably the most famous spy of the early 20th century. Now, call me naive about international espionage, but if you are the most famous spy, you are the worst. So Sidney Riley turns up in the Gulf, cats out the bag, war breaks out because it's a war to defend Belgian neutrality in the same way that Belgium has defended the neutrality of the Congo. The first British regiment goes to Basra, where it's held by the Turks for just over 3 years until finally in 1918 it captures 3 key provinces of the former Ottoman Empire, Baghdad, Basra, Mosul. Within a month the war is over. Now here we are going into the first world, and the irony is historians of the future will look at us now and say, but they knew they'd come to the end of oil anyway. The age of hydrocarbon man was over. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UN's 1,000 scientists said you've got to cut carbon emissions by 90%. Now at the minute, some suicide bomber flies into Dungeness, we are fucked. Same suicide bomber flies into an offshore wind farm, he's just going to get 2 extra propellers. Jihad! And what's the worst that's going to happen? Suppose they let them come, send 10 at once, 20 at once, hitting every offshore wind farm around the country. A slight power surge is what we will experience. There'll be Osama in the desert pressing play and record saying, unless you remove the military bases from the holy countries, the volume of your CDs will continue to fluctuate unpredictably. I was asked to go on question time day after tomorrow. I said no, for a number of reasons. Firstly, they said they wanted only one anti-war person on a panel of 5, which isn't really representative. Whatever you think about that. But the other thing, that march, on February 5th, there was a lot of people there. The word march was a misnomer. Because it's just, here we go, striding together, brothers and sisters. There were so many of you shuffling along like this. But I began full of love for my fellow humanity, though, on that day. I thought, yes, here we go. My brothers and sisters united by a common purpose, all straight. And after about half an hour, I was thinking, you blowed up fucking whistle in my ear again, I'll give you what for you. Long-haired hippie, dose of national service is what you need, my friend. But also, they sort of create, so already they've made what is a mainstream view look fringe. And also, if you start saying, it's set up so if you say certain things which are beyond the bounds, the narrow bounds, for example, if you were to say, the Prime Minister is a war criminal, you will look like some sloganeering nutter. And people say, well, we know what war criminals look like, they look like Goebbels, but what did Goebbels look like to the Germans? The communicator, the family man, who broke, and also, think what people were hung for in Nuremberg. You read what actually the judges said, having first found out the Germans plead that it was preemptive strikes, they needed to defend themselves. The quote is, they read this out to everyone before they hung them. To initiate a war of aggression is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. So Blair would be hung if the Nuremberg laws applied. But then even if they did let you say that, then they'd say, well, okay, so we've all agreed Blair's a war criminal. Now, chlorine in the water. What do we think of, and then move on, and so I'm not, so I've said no. Also, I'm a terrible coward as well. That's the main reason. But it's true. But it's just, well, what do we do about this? And I think, to initiate a war of aggression. Everybody knows that, that they had the idea for the war first and had to fucking justify it later. To initiate a war of aggression. What was Jack Straw's job in those crucial weeks and months? It's impossible. I've struggled through my mind to find any other job description that fits what he was doing then, apart from the phrase global shit stirrer. That's what he was doing, man. He goes round the world like my